Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Definitely appreciate your time and coming to today's session. It's a different kind of session for NAESM conference. We're really going to be drilling into the arts and talking about art, spirituality, and its relevance for advocacy. So the name of the presentation today is Opening the Gates of Healing and Advocacy, Reviving Black Queer Divinity Through the Arts. Okay, so let me just go ahead and jump in and describe or explain who I am. So my name is Marques. I'm the co-founder and the co-executive director, along with Michaela Wuna of Serpent. And we're a Pittsburgh-based organization that seeks to advance Black LGBTQ culture through the exploration of multimedia art, traditional African cosmologies, emerging tech, and innovative healing protocols. So as a collective, we've worked on a wide variety of projects: film, live performance, photography, public installation, music, literature, virtual reality, spatial augmented reality, and we also host spiritual retreats. Okay, so our network has really grown over the last few years, and we work with a wide variety of Black queer artists spanning the United States, but also folks in England and Nigeria. So earlier this month, on May 3rd, we released a project called Mid-Science and the Gatekeepers. And this is a collection of 16 glass sculptures of ancient Egyptian Black queer deities. And so I'll spend the first half of the talk really just talking about Black queer spiritual and cultural traditions. And then the second half, I'll bring it back to the work that we all do. But these 16 figures who are part of this project comprise the foundation of a very complex system of ritual and cultural practices and deep conversation with ancient Egyptian and Afro-diasporic religion. And it's a system that can claim to be the world's first Black LGBTQ spiritual path. And so this will be a very high-level introduction to this project, and we'll talk about this fusion of art and spirituality and the celebration of Black queer divinity, and dive a little deeper into how this understanding of Black queer divinity can fuel our advocacy and community mobilization efforts. So our goals for today, again, as I said, we really just want to give a high-level overview of queer African cultural and spiritual traditions. We'll start about 10,000 years in the past and work our way forward. Talk about how to connect contemporary Black LGBTQ community with models of queer divinity. And then also think about how a Black queer spiritual system can serve as a tool for healing and a framework for communal growth and empowerment. So basically, this is really a project of innovation, of trying to understand how do we develop a cultural system, a spiritual system that really speaks to our unique challenges that we face as a community, and really explicitly, how do we think about how to offer pathways to healing the wounds inflicted by racism, homophobia, spiritual bias, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so like I said, we're going to go way back to the beginning and really try to think about how ancient Black queer communities and traditions are. Of course, we have tons of homophobic people trying to say that we're just a deviation, an aberration found nowhere in history. But of course, our presence goes back thousands of years before all of these homophobic ideologies. Okay, so we're going to start with cave paintings. And this is a cave painting that was found roughly around 8,000 BC, 10,000 years ago, by the San people who live in contemporary Zimbabwe. And this was found in a cave located in a city, next to a city called Garuve. I love this image. You have to imagine it on more of a brown rock-colored stone face with more of like a red ochreish kind of painting. Mm-hmm. But I mean, really what we have here is just a flat-out gay orgy. I mean, large penises flying in every direction, probably giving, I guess, what this hotel was giving last night. And so, yeah, a lot of just interesting scenes. So if you look at the top left, you got these three men kind of engaging in this kind of anal intercourse. I mean, there's a penis between thighs, so we got a little intercrural intercourse. Bottom left, we have a couple facing each other, one basically riding on top of the other. And in the bottom right, we have one basically, I guess, inserting a penis into himself from behind. okay, and I'm sure, everybody gave the proper consent. I'm sure everybody was getting tested regularly. But having images like this really speaks to the depth of our place in history. And the thing that I actually like about this image, especially when you compare it to other cave paintings of the same time, is that this is an image that's not just about sex. I mean, it's a Marlon, we got a cave painting of gay orgies from 8000 BC. What? From currently Zimbabwe. So think about it for the Black Gay Sex. This would be a good cover for your book. But it's not just about sex, but I mean, it's all about healing dance, it's about trance, it's about ritual. And what I like here is that we have a sense of Black queerness that's really being celebrated and immortalized through art. We have, I think, showing through this really vivid understanding about how queer sexuality is an important part of the fabric of human life. And I think you could say this is a scene of what we would currently call unapologetic Black joy, or Black boy joy. Queerness without condemnation, suppression, and I think this is really a paradigm of our history that we can draw from and think about guiding us into this future world that we are trying to create. Okay, so moving forward from there a couple thousand years, I think to really ground our understanding of Black queer history, we have to turn to ancient Egypt. And here you find the first formal articulations of Black queerness. You find the names of Black queer individuals, a lot of religious speculation around the importance of Black queerness for understanding the universe. But what you're looking at here is the tomb of a gay male couple, Nyankanu and Khnumhotep, and this was from around 2500 BC. And interestingly enough, these two men were manicurists. And so I actually have my nails done in honor of them. So imagine, they did the nails of the pharaoh. So even, 4,500 years ago, clearly our community is our community. This is the kind of work that these men did. So they decided that they wanted to be buried together. And when you go into the tomb, there's all of these interesting photos of these two men, and also an entire queer community of gay priests that were celebrating at different festivals, and you see different scenes from everyday life. But I think the most important image you find in this tomb is the image on the right of them looking at each other face to face. And so this image, this pose, was really a traditional pose that was reserved for husband and wife. And so by having these two men that were carved in this position, we can say that this is actually the first representation of a same-sex couple in human history, period. So we can think about, and of course this is 2,500 years before the origin of Christianity, before the origin of certain forms of monotheism. So we have full African traditions where Black men are really celebrating their love for each other and building monuments to Black queerness that have lasted for 4,500 years. I mean, this is a tomb that you actually can still go into and visit. And if they could build these kinds of monuments to Black queerness that have lasted for 4,500 years, it gives us some inspiration so that we can do the same. So also from ancient Egypt, it's really important because you get this really interesting archive of these queer and androgynous deities. So this figure is a figure called Hapi, who was seen as the personification of the Nile River, who symbolized the fertility and abundance that will come from the yearly flood of the Nile River, all of the Black fertile soil kind of dredged up from the bottom to provide soil for people to plant crops in. And interestingly enough, he was depicted as a man, but also with these extremely large breasts and a pregnant stomach. So again, I think you have a figure here we could really argue was the first androgynous deity in human history. And we get this really interesting collection of cultural and spiritual figures that have these non-normative genders, they change genders, very fluid presentations, very expansive understandings of how gender presents itself, particularly in the divine.
Yeah. Can you just tell me the name you said?
Hapi, H-A-P-I.
H-A-P-I.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll come back to this figure a little bit more later. And yeah, please feel free to just jump in. I mean, I can talk. Each one of these slides I could probably talk for about 2 to 3 hours about. So yeah, feel free to just jump in.
Okay.
But also, ancient Egypt is really important because you have what I call queer cosmologies. And the first, again, another first, some of the first creation texts of human history. And the reason I like this one in particular because it's about a deity who creates the world through ejaculating into his own mouth. And in no way could that ever be construed as a heterosexual kind of creation story. And so I'll just read a little bit of it. So I had union with my clenched hand. And so if you look at the top right for the word had union, you can see the glyph of an erect penis ejaculating. I had union with my clenched hand. I joined myself in an embrace. Again, you can see the glyph of the penis there. I joined myself in an embrace with my shadow. I poured seed into my own mouth. And then I sent forth issue in the form of shu. Shu is kind of a representative of like a masculine or electric principle. I sent forth moisture in the form of tefnud. It was more of a feminine magnetic principle. So anyway, you have this kind of quasi-androgynous figure who ejaculates into his own mouth and then spits it out, and the world is formed through the spitting of this ejaculation. So I guess this age-old question, do we spit or swallow? Already been thought about thousands of years before now. And even tefnud, it doesn't have to be necessarily stereotypical masculine feminine. You can even think about it as more of like a phallic principle, a very kind of hard yang energy versus the testicular, kind of soft, more yin energy. But here we definitely don't get a sense of, everybody's born in sin and you have to ask for forgiveness. We're these damaged people. Yeah. But here we have a deity who's getting the party started, for all of us. And in an interesting way, in this conception, we ourselves, in the material world itself, is really the embodiment of the deity's sperm. So we are the ejaculate of the God that's kind of existing and moving through the world. Okay. So if ancient Egypt was this kind of black queer space with black queer couples, black queer deities, black queer cosmologies, what happened? How did history become the anti-black, anti-queer hellhole of a landscape we live in? Complicated story, many answers to that, but one answer, of course, is the consolidation of whiteness and the consolidation of Christianity. So I want to look at this text here from Eusebius called The Life of Constantine. So just as a quick history lesson, Constantine was one of the emperors of Rome who was the first to establish Christianity as the imperial religion of the Roman Empire. And this was a biography from around 339 AD. Very interesting about this kind of evangelical zeal that he went into as he was evangelizing Christianity. So he says, consistently with this zeal, he issued successive laws and ordinances forbidding any to sacrifice to idols, to consult diviners, to erect images, and inasmuch as the Egyptians, especially those of Alexandria, have been accustomed to honor their river, or Hapi, this kind of androgynous deity, through a priesthood composed of effeminate men, I guess that's what they called the girls back then, a further law was passed commanding the extermination of the whole class as vicious, that no one might thenceforward be found tainted with the like impurity.
Damn.
So much to unpack, and we could spend a whole nother hour just on this alone. But so we start off with these laws that are trying to erase history, basically. And of course, we see the same thing today. Think about Florida, don't say gay, don't talk about black history. We see a full consolidation of Roman Christianity through this violence against black queerness. We have a whole lot of things happening. So we're banning idols. So we're banning black queer ritual practice, idol worship. We're banning black queer knowledge systems of divination. We're banning black queer images, so art practices. So all of these things are things that this version of white Christianity is trying to basically stamp out and erase. We have, of course, they mentioned there's this priesthood of effeminate men. So again, we have the sense here that gay men were not thought of as people to be on the margins or people to just be tolerated, but clearly were an important part of a cultural fabric with maintaining rituals and celebrations and festivals. And then, of course, we have this genocide, basically, to say, hey, just kill the facts, basically. It basically says, it's like, exterminate the whole class. We're gonna just wipe out every single one of you. And really, that's been this kind of genocidal logic that's been put in place that we're still dealing with the repercussions of. And of course, tainted with the like impurity. That's what they always say. You're going to spoil the kids. You're going to, just the grossness is going to infect us all. So all of those kinds of themes and all of this kind of matrix of white supremacy is still something that we're still kind of working our way out of. So this project that I'm going to talk about today, Minorities and Gatekeepers, is really one about reviving our deities, to say, hey, we had these whole full systems of our approach to the divine. How do we reinterpret it and recalibrate it for our current moment? How do we bring back our knowledge systems, our art practices, particularly with making statues and images? I'm thinking about the spiritual purpose of queerness. I mean, so we had full organized priesthoods, full organized societies of Black queer people who were maintaining a whole cultural fabric. And then thinking about reviving our culture after trauma. So one, we have this trauma of genocide. I mean, has anybody, just by show of hands, heard about this blanket genocide that happened in the 300s? So exactly. So like, we don't know their names, we don't know their stories, their contributions, and of course our community, we've had trauma after trauma inflicted on us, all the way down to the current HIV/AIDS crisis that we're still trying to come up with a response to. So anyway, so this project is basically about thinking about how to recreate a Black queer spiritual culture to speak to our current needs. Okay, so I know this is a quick move through history, but hopefully y'all are keeping up with me so far. All right, so now I'm going to just talk about a little bit about the name, Minorities and Gatekeepers, and what that means. Okay, so just first of all, this idea of the gatekeeper, what does this mean, particularly when we think about African traditions? So now we're going to move over to West Africa. Malidoma Sobey is a spiritualist from the Dogra tribe of Burkina Faso. I'm glad some people are recognizing this quote, which is great. So it says, among the Dogra people, gender has very little to do with anatomy. It is purely energetic. A male who is physically male can vibrate female energy and vice versa. The gay person is very well integrated into the community with the functions that delete this whole spiritual differentiation of him or her. The gay person is looked at primarily as a gatekeeper. The earth is looked at, from my tribal perspective, as a very, very delicate machine or consciousness with high vibrational points, which certain people must be guardians of in order for the tribe to keep its continuity with the gods and with the spirits that dwell there. Spirits of this world and spirits of other worlds. Okay, so a lot to unpack here as well, but basically what he's saying is that the Dogra tradition posits that the creator is androgynous, and that this primordial androgynous blackness is the source from which the world itself emerges. So because people who are currently constructed as queer or LGBTQ can vibrate both masculine and feminine energy, the idea was that we had this special connection to the creator, and therefore we're tasked with being the guardians of these high vibrational points between the physical world and the spiritual world. So that's why you see in many indigenous contexts that queer people were the shamans, the diviners, the people who ran the cultural initiations. And so this idea of emergence from androgyny is really a Pan-African concept that you find not only in ancient Egypt and the Dogra tribe, but all throughout Central, Southern Africa. Go ahead, yeah.
So honestly, it's starting to make me feel like the reason we experience so much oppression is because they know that we have the power to take over the world. I'm part of the Crib Fellowship, and so one of our workshops on our first day was a Bodeme, where she was telling us all about this, and there was a comment in there that said, and forgive me if I say it wrong, but please correct me if you get what I'm trying to say. I think it said, you're not a gatekeeper because you're gay or lesbian, but you're gay or lesbian because you are a gatekeeper, or something along those lines. And I might be misquoting it, but essentially it speaks to how, individuals who can, exude both masculine and feminine energy, it was supposed to be that way. It wasn't like something you came out the womb and you was just like, okay, you're gonna be gay now. No, it was supposed to be that way because you have, it's like you come out of, the womb with the power to change something, whether it be making something better or even if it's just to change a person's way of thinking and things like that. So, I'm glad that you touched on this because it's something I've been thinking about since, what's today, Friday? Wednesday.
Perfect, yes. Yeah, no, and that's exactly what this project is in conversation with, and trying to think about how to use the arts to activate these kinds of ideas and to really change our self-conception, our self-image, so that we can tap into this very sense of power.
Got you.
Absolutely. So yeah, so you're right on board with what we're doing. So yeah, and so this idea about the spiritual function and purpose of queerness. Also, you can find it in ancient Egypt as well. Won't go through this whole thing, but there's this word, him, H-M, which was designated, I'll just go halfway down. The hymns are depicted performing all kinds of sacrifices for the dead. Perhaps the hymn priesthood was an association of exclusive homosexuals, of which they were prominent members. These priests were merely playing the spiritual role that homosexuals in many cultures play. So again, just building on these kinds of ideas as we're thinking about how to activate them again for contemporary Black LGBTQ audiences. Okay, so now I'm going to just go quickly to the term myth science. And so this idea about myth science comes from the cosmic philosophy of Sun Ra. Not sure if any of you are jazz fans, but yeah, so perfect. Yeah, so he's a jazz musician who started really in the 30s and 40s and had a several decade-long career. But you can see he generated this term myth science, and I think it's a really helpful term to kind of understand. Yeah, come in. I saw John at the door. Yeah, come in. Yeah.
I know I'm in front of
Don't worry. Come on there. Yeah, so I mean, you can already see on the left how he's engaging with ancient Egyptian motifs. And so by calling this project myth science, we're kind of already putting this in a tradition of other Black queer artists who are thinking about and engaging with the legacy of ancient Egypt. So myth science is really thinking about our own unique approach to knowledge. So it's something that's not locked into Western understandings of rationality and logic, but myth science is really about not studying or not necessarily being concerned with the external world, but using these potent combinations of rituals and symbols as a means to expand human consciousness, with the goal being the divinization of the human, or basically turning humans into divine beings. And so by using these two terms together, myth science and the gatekeepers, this project is really about restoring the divine nature of Black queer people and providing a full map or of archetypal identities that the community should master. Okay, so again, we've got these 16 glass statues. I'll kind of go through them one by one. Not going to spend a lot of time talking about the technique, but we had 16 Black queer models that served as the subjects for these statues, covered them with like a body double material, used that to get these wax prototypes, sculpted the wax prototypes, created a mold around them, melted out the wax, then poured bits of black glass into these molds, put them in a kiln for 3 weeks, also went into the hot shop and made these crowns or headpieces with glass blowing and hot sculpting techniques. If you have questions about that, we can talk about it later, but that's a whole different conversation. All right, but let's jump into these Black queer deities. Yeah, just kind of rock with me for a little bit. I'm going to walk through all of them, and then we'll talk about the advocacy piece and what it means for our culture and politics. Okay, so thinking about a deity and what a deity is from a traditional African perspective, it's not this idea of these kind of imaginary figures in the sky, these kind of fairy tale sort of figures, but these are images that represent energies found in nature that really manifest on different levels. So that could be cosmological, biological, astrological, ecological. So it's thinking about how these principles of nature show up and manifest in all of these different contexts. So we have this particular quote, the Neteru, or Neteru means deities in ancient Egyptian, are the shaping factors of all physical structures and events. They underlie, direct, and integrate all physical realities, from the subtlest subelectronic forces to the most complex of galaxies to the organ systems making up the physical body. All right, so from there, we'll just kind of jump into some of the figures. Okay, so I'll have the reference, so the traditional images on the left, so you can see what they look like, and then you can see the statues on the right, and how the final versions came out. All right, so we start with this figure, Geb. So Geb is the deity of the earth. So we have this goose as the icon or the symbol. So of course we know a goose lives in many different ecosystems, lives in the water, lives on the land, lives in the air. So this is a figure that's talking about the interconnectedness of all of the Earth's ecosystems and how we have a duty to maintain them. It's interesting because, for most deity systems in the world, when you think about the earth, is usually thought about as a female figure, Mother Earth, the womb of the earth. But ancient Egypt, again, is the only place on the planet where you have a male deity that's the deity of the earth, which I think also speaks to the queerness of this particular figure. I mean, so this figure is also asking us, okay, well, what can we as Black queer people do to stand up against environmental pollution, against deforestation? How do we think about standing up against the depletion of natural resources? How do we understand the cycles of the earth? Because the earth has these daily, monthly, yearly cycles. How do we understand the biorhythms of our body in connection to the earth? How do we think of the physical body as a pathway to the divine? So this is all about physical health, the resources that we need in our environment, all of these kinds of things. And again, a lot to say about each of these figures, but we'll keep moving. But I will say that each model actually was chosen through this interesting process of divination, and each model has these interesting similarities to the traits of the deity. So you basically see how these ancient figures show up in modern ways through members of our community. So this particular model is this guy named Wesley. Interestingly enough, he's a vice president of a biotechnology firm where he develops compounds from plants and fungi used to develop nutritional supplements, agricultural products, stuff for the food and beverage industry. So all the things that you would think of with
Earth.
Exactly. So all of those things are kind of connected. Okay, so next we have this figure Mahus, who's this kind of lion-headed deity of war. Okay, so when we think about war deities, and this is specifically a Black queer war deity, so what does this mean for our context? So biologically, we can think about this figure as a representation of the immune system. So thinking about how the immune system fights infection, fights to defend its borders, its boundaries. So this is a principle of saying, okay, here's how I fight to live. I have a right to be here, just like every other living creature has a right to fight for its existence. Psychologically, we could think about this deity as the courage that it takes to come out. So like those inner fights that we have where we're like, okay, no, I'm going to be myself. I'm going to kind of cut you. Like, if you try to say, I can't be who I am. Collectively or sociologically, we could think about a figure like this, I'll just give you some different angles, as a principle of community defense. So this is like a figure that we can invoke to protect against bullying, against gay bashing, against all the anti-gay, homophobic legislation we have to deal with. I mean, so this is a deity of war. So this is kind of an embodiment of how all Black queer people throughout all of time and space have thought about being a warrior. This is a symbol of our inner warrior and how we show up in external battles when it's time to defend the community, but also our internal battles when it's time to fight against, our procrastination, our addiction, our shyness, our impatience, or whatever it is. So this is a figure very powerful for what its resonance means for our community. Okay, so moving to a different extreme, this figure is Meow. So it's like this cat deity. And so if we think about, Meow sounds like a cat, right? So think about, this is all about the sacred aspects of queer sexuality, of pleasure, of wealth, of luxury. I think the way I explain this is like, think about the ball scene and how people say, oh, it's pussy, it's cunt. This cat deity is literally the embodiment. You can see the figure on the left with like the earrings and the instruments and the breasts out and all of that. So this is like our inner sex kitten. How do we get in touch with our understanding of pleasure, our understanding of the body, all the systems of gay tantra? How do we use gay sexuality for healing purposes and things like that. It's thinking about wealth and luxury and the purpose of wealth and luxury from a Black queer spiritual angle. That it's not just about Gucci for Gucci's sake, but it's about how do we get wealth and money so that we can fund our cultural and spiritual efforts. Meow is about beauty and the kind of harmonics and the geometrical structure that supports the unfolding of beauty. Just giving you some different angles. So everything around how we understand pleasure embodied in Meow. So again, just like we have an inner warrior, we have an inner sexuality and pleasure principle that we also have to learn how to elevate and get in touch with as well.
And did you say that he was deity of something specific, or I'm just jotting down each one and what you say?
Yeah, so these are kind of complex figures. So,
okay, gotcha.
So yeah, so I would say sexuality, wealth,
Gotcha.
luxury, pleasure, beauty,
Okay.
all of these kinds of things, and learning how to activate these as spiritual powers.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, so this next one is Akwat. And this is a figure that's more about communication and language. How do we use words? How can words be used to both illuminate reality, but also obscure reality? It's all about the belief systems that we hold. And sometimes those belief systems kind of run us astray. Think about all the symbolism of a canine. So just like we have dogs that like to dig, it's a figure that's about digging for information, digging for facts, understanding logic. How do we approach education from a Black queer aspect? How do we think about verbal reasoning, rhetorical persuasion, all of these kinds of things? Dogs also can be trained, specifically to understand human language and language commands. So this is all about how do we train our beliefs, and it's that voice that's always talking to us inside our head, like, oh, I know I'm on a diet, but I can eat a piece of cake and it's not a big deal. So how do we deal with those kinds of trickster beliefs and the trickster language that's inside of our head? So all these kinds of things around talkativeness, communication, the media, and our specific approach to those kinds of dynamics. And there's a whole other story to be told about hair in this project and how we made the hair, but we can talk about that another time. But this was like the Michael B. Jordan, Killmonger kind of situation going on. Okay, so this is Kepara. Kepara is this scarab, or the dung beetle. And so this figure is all about transformation and rebirth. And I can give you a different angle so you can see the full beetle. And so it's very interesting because if you know dung beetles, and I've probably done more research into these beetles than I probably need to, but they're really important to the ecosystem of the savanna. They track these large herbivores. Elephants basically shit a lot, basically. So these little insects kind of gather it up into these little balls. They roll these balls along. They put their eggs in there, and so when the eggs are born, these larvae have a food source to eat off of. So on one hand, this deity is about how do we turn waste into the divine? How do we recycle our energies? How do we think about our failures and how we reinvent ourselves from the waste of our failures? It's interesting too because, of course, for a lot of queer people, we're kind of shamed for our love of anal sex. But here we have a literal deity where it's like, no, it's kind of waste, it's kind of dung that actually is the key to thinking about the divine. And even that anality has an important part to play in the full sweep and circle of life. And so this is all about growth, becoming, reinvention. And it's interesting too because these little beetles are one of the only animals actually that guide and navigate through the Milky Way. So these little insects can tell from the position of the stars where they're located and then push their little balls in comparison. So again, this is about how do we use these larger natural cycles to kind of propel ourselves into being new people. Okay, so this next figure is Khonsu, who's this deity of the moon. And you can see, traditionally this figure has this side lock, which we turned into a whole series of box braids, which you can kind of see here on the side. But Khonsu is a figure that has to do with all of the traditional things we associate with the moon. Particularly, I would say Khonsu is the talent or the power inside of us that nurtures. Whether that's nurturing other people, particularly like the elderly, or nurturing little children, nurturing projects, nurturing our own inner child. Again, to use some ballroom language, this is like the mother of the house. This is like the gay mother. And Khonsu actually kind of presides over oceans. The ocean, which represents the subconscious, the deep kind of collective subconscious, particularly very close to seahorses. Seahorses are these animals, one of the few animals where the males of the species actually incubate eggs and give birth. So this is about how, as gay people, as queer people, do we support other people? How do we nurture each other? How do we nurture our community? And of course, because it's a moon, this also has to deal with meditation, with dreaming, with our internal states. How do we use our internal power to change our habits? How do we think about astral traveling, dynamics like humility? Again, all of the things that we would traditionally associate with this kind of lunar energy and lunar power. Okay, so again, we've got 16 figures, so I'm gonna just run through them quickly. But again, if there's anyone you want me to stop on, just let me know. Okay, so if Kansu was more about our internal selves and our internal power, Ra, the deity of the sun, is all about how we show up in public. So this is about queer leadership. I mean, so of course the sun, of course, is always there, is always shining. This is about how you're the king or queen of your own castle. This is about your inner heroism. How do you show up? How do you show up as a leader? How do you show up as a leader in the Black queer community specifically? How do you use spiritual skill to inspire people, to inspire the masses? So I would say like what we saw today, clearly from T.S. Madison and Dominique, I mean, this is very raw energy. Like, I'm going to stand on the stage, share my talents with the community, shine for everybody to see. This is about, how do we have a control of our emotions? This is about self-mastery. It's about free will. It's about autonomy. How do we make the right choice when we're in situations in life? And really, again, how do we use our talents for the greater good of the community? And the reason not to go too deep into that, but the way we created this disc too, it actually changes colors as you walk around it. So from some angles it's purple, some angles it's gold, to just give you this rising and setting sun effect.
Okay.
All right, so the next deity is Sobek, who is this crocodile figure. And so the crocodile is all about the power to make it through the daily practicalities of life. I mean, so the crocodile is one of the few animals that actually survived from the era of the dinosaurs. So this is all about resilience. This is all about, how do you have this external toughness to just make it through all of the nonsense we have to deal with. It's all about this kind of things around personal and professional relationships and well-being. Okay, so let me give you a couple of examples. So we know alligators, so they live in these very murky kinds of situations. They eat this kind of rotting meat, but they're able to live without getting infected with bacteria. So these kinds of animals are speaking about diet, about hygiene, about cleanliness, about nutrition. Again, all of the kind of details of our daily routine, about exercise, how do we take care of ourselves? It's also about how do we deal with our coworkers. So we know, crocodiles always laying in wait. The people that we're around, sometimes we think they're our friends, but they're kind of waiting to take whatever information we give them to kind of snap at us. It's about how we deal with debt and credit. Like these credit card companies, again, that just want to snatch us up in the jaws of debt. So again, this is about how do we survive just the day-to-day details of life. How do we get our routines together? How do we get all of these things to work? Okay, so the next one is Ahi. So Ahi is about, with his heart, about the talent that we all have to promote social harmony. So this is about how do we keep our relationships together, and relationships of all sorts. So on one hand, this could be our romantic relationships. How do we activate this talent of treating our partner or partners with respect? This is about our business relationships. How do we negotiate win-win situations for all of us? And so we all have a talent within us to know how to keep our friend groups together, to how to kind of, keep a vibe going, whether it's at a party or a vacation or a trip. So this is all about, also it's about a certain kind of etiquette and manners. How do we talk to each other as Black queer people? Can we speak with the eloquence of the melodiousness of this heart? Okay, so next we have this Scorpion deity. And this deity is really interesting, I think, for this particular context, because this is all about the shadow self, the inner turmoil that we have to deal with. So if you think about, let's say, the sting of the scorpion, so this kind of summarizes all of our kind of like toxic behaviors or like the toxic pieces that we hold, whether it's like jealousy or internalized homophobia. It's helping us to think about the woundedness that we often deal with, the wounds that we get from our families, from our parents, from our friends, from our relationships. How do we understand all of these kinds of things that we deal with, whether it's resentment, guilt, all the dynamics of scandal and shame, because we all have to deal with these parts of ourselves that we don't want public. So think about how scorpions are always kind of hiding in the shadows. This is like all of the elements of ourselves that we try to keep hidden or try to keep away from the mainstream. Okay, but it's also about the things that we have to face. We have to kind of face this woundedness. We have to face these generational traumas. So this, I would say, will be a figure that's asking us to deal with the traumas of the genocide that we started with, the traumas of the AIDS crisis, the traumas of slavery. How do we become the wounded healer and transcend all of the wounds that have been inflicted on us? Okay, so moving quickly through this last half, we have the snake deity, this cobra deity, and Mikhail was the model for this figure, Watcha. And so this is all about psychic power, and particularly the way in which psychic power can be used to harm, destroy, or to help protect. And so we have, so this is all about moving beyond the rational and our kind of moving through day-to-day life. Because we're always surrounded by this subtle energy, whether it's propaganda, vote for me, or buy this product, or move to this place. We're always affected by the advertising and the charisma of other people. So this is a figure that's asking us to figure out how to wield and command the subtle energy that's all around us. Okay, so we have here.
What's the name of the last deity I missed it?
Watcha.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so we have Tahuti Ma'an, who is a figure of wisdom, universal knowledge. So this is a figure that embodies all of the systems of divination, all of the systems of the mandalas of understanding how all parts of the universe are connected to each other. This is all about the cosmic law that supports the whole universe. So there is a part of us, of all of us, because we're connected to the Creator, that has the answers to all questions, to all problems. And this figure basically summarizes this universal omniscience that we're all connected to. And I also just love the 360 waves for this one. Okay, our last couple here. So this one is Ptah. So he has this anvil as his icon, mainly because this figure was thought of as a deity of craftsmen and kind of an architect of the gods. So this is a figure that's dealing with all of the shaping forces of reality. So everything that exists lives in a particular time and place and has a particular life cycle. So this figure is all about the formation of the different places or matrices in which things exist. So if we think about it on a personal level, this would be our interdisciplinarian. Like, this is how do you discipline yourself? How do you organize your life? How do you show up for things that you have a duty to do? This is all about obligation and really how do you do the things that you have to do. So if, let's say, Meow, the cat god, is all about the Twinkie party scene, pleasure and fun, this one is all about, okay, this is like a fatherly or a grandfatherly energy. This is actually also a figure of Black queer elders, and thinking about how do we honor the wisdom of folks who have a role of honor in our community. Around this issues of fate, of destiny, of the cycles of life, and how things at the most microscopic level to the most macroscopic level come together and are organized. Okay, so this is Hapi, the figure that we talked about a lot earlier. So again, this androgynous figure, this fusion of masculine and feminine, with the male who has the pregnant stomach and the large breast. And so this figure really represents a certain kind of enlightenment, a certain kind of completion of the human journey, where you have fused all of these opposites within yourself, where you've learned how to access all of these powers and bring them into unity with each other. So like where you've transcended all kinds of social and political boundaries, This figure also, because the Nile River would flood every year, is all about communal wealth and communal unity, and about how do we as a community come together to build, to kind of create infrastructure together. How do we understand really some of the foundational elements of life. So I think about RuPaul and the quote, he says, we're all born naked, but the rest is drag. And I think this figure implementizes that more than any, because it's not about the clothes we wear or the genders we think are immutable, but this kind of neutral divine state that can put on any clothes or can become any kind of persona. Okay, so we're here at our last two. So Nu, who is this deity of the black primordial waters. You can see the black water in the clear vase on top of his head. And so, of course, water has this property that it can take any shape or any form. So this is all about the kind of primordial energy matter that the universe itself was formed out of. It's the kind of original state of energy matter that has no structure, form, or any kind of property. So this is kind of about how do we take our consciousness back to the highest level possible. This is like these moments where we realize our connections to the whole universe. So I would say you find this figure in moments of, let's say, self-sacrifice, where you can kind of give up your life for the community because you realize, my individual consciousness is just a part of this larger whole. Or moments of, let's say, religious ecstasy, or even orgasm, where you just kind of blank out for a minute, where you just kind of find yourself just reabsorbed into the greater cosmic whole. Exactly, it's one of the good ones. Yeah, exactly. So these ideas about inner peace, about the joy that comes from knowing that one can become anything and be formed into anything. And so if this figure is infinite energy matter, this final figure, Marques, is infinite consciousness.
You should share where the figure's traveling next year.
Oh yeah, yeah, so this figure is infinite consciousness. And so you see these feathers, and this figure actually has feathers, but there's no bird. So this is just pure flight. This is the queer consciousness that existed before the universe itself came into existence. The figure that just watches, the figure that's the unseen seer, the observer, the witness consciousness that gave rise to the manifest world. And this also talks about how space itself, even the space we're in, space seems empty, but it's actually full of consciousness that's always watching us, that's learning from us, that's feeling the energy we're projecting into it, and responding back. Okay, so that's the 16 figures. Thank you all for sitting through that. I know that was a lot, but yeah, so that's basically the archive of the project. Okay, so just quickly, I'll show a quick video. So we've also done some other art activations around this project. So Black Star Sanctuary is one of them, where we created this 15-minute VR film that explores this large-scale temple complex that has these large 3D versions of these queer deities. So thinking about how do we create new spaces, how do we create Black queer spiritual spaces, and also we're kind of working to develop this film into a VR experience where you can put on a headset and walk through the space, see these deities in large form, and of course this is a prelude to them building these Black queer spiritual spaces. So just a quick So if anybody's around Pittsburgh from now until July 28th, the show is still up. So you can kind of see we had this film projected onto the walls of the space, of the gallery space, so you kind of actually see the full film and walk through the whole exhibit. So yeah, so just a few shots of what this looks like. Yeah,
Can you bring that to the circle?
if you don't want it, we'll come.
So, Dr. Rick, the order of the deities, is that specific order, you have a number, or is that
Yes.
random the way you put them?
No, so there is a pattern. So the deities move from the most kind of concrete material figure. So it starts with like the deity of the earth, the deity of sex, the deity of war, all the way up to more abstract cosmic figures, just infinite consciousness. So yeah, so it moves from like individual deities about our social, collective existence, like the deity of relationships, of working through our daily routines, our kind of personal woundedness from community, all the way up to these deities of like infinite wisdom, infinite power, infinite consciousness. So yeah, so there is a kind of a narrative and a map in how they're all laid out. Okay, so I think I'll just stop there. Just if there are any questions.
Good call.
Okay, cool. So it's just, yeah, go ahead.
So, do you, what kind of, well, two questions. What kind of, do you have like information, literature that you can give so that?
Oh, yeah.
I wanna.
Yeah, so we got much more written material about all of these figures on our website, therainbowserpent.org.
Okay.
What is it? You said the rainbow serpent?
Yeah, therainbowserpent.org. Yeah, you can find information about all the other projects that we're doing, not just the sculpture, but like the film, the photography, and everything else we're working on.
Okay. So that's one way to try to get you to the second.
For sure.
NDC.
For sure.
The second question is, so can you talk a little bit about the beginning of your journey? Did this interest in Black queer spirituality and Black queer ancient spirituality and deities, did this start with your dissertation work, or did it start after? And what came upon you to realize that there was a queer antiquity?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a long question, but I'll say the simple version is that it's just something I've been doing since probably like middle school, actually. Because I had to go to the library every day after school. My school was like right down the street from the library. I would wait there for my mom to pick me up after work. And so that's where I kind of discovered all of the kind of anthropological books about ancient Egypt, all the big coffee table books. So I think that was something that struck me very early. Especially growing up in the South in Macon, Georgia, on a plantation, which I always tell people that and they don't believe me. So I think seeing these large-scale images of Blackness, of ancient Egypt, always, I think, set a seed that there was another paradigm. Mm-hmm. And it's just something that kind of stuck with me. And then it was just also interesting to me, too, seeing some of the images and being struck by how little conversation there was about them. So even the image of Neachanem Khnumhotep, you would have Egyptologists that would say, oh, well, they were just friends, or oh, they were just brothers. And it's like, well, but you could be brothers and not like kissing each other. So there would be all these kind of homophobic and anti-Black strands, even in the scholarship, to say, like, okay, can we not understand what our eyes are telling us? And when you see like a deity with big breasts that's a man, it's like, okay, is anybody going to say anything about what we're actually seeing with our own eyes? And kind of thinking, and I still remember very early, even in dealing with growing up in the Bible Belt, dealing with that whole piece of growing up in the church, I was like, okay, well, one thing has to change, and I'm not changing. So we're gonna have to find some other histories and some other narratives. Okay, so I did have a quick piece to actually kind of bring it back to like more of like the themes of the conference and kind of talk about the intersection between art, spirituality, and advocacy. So it's like questions around, okay, well now that we have, thanks. So now it's a question of like, okay, now that we have the system, so what? Or how do we operationalize it, or what next? Okay, so yeah, so I wanted to kind of think about what are some of the ways in which a system like this could really be important for our advocacy and important for our community mobilization. What difference does it make? What can we use this for? So on one hand, we had this idea about an affirmation of identity. This visibility piece is really important because of course we have so many mainstream white queer spaces that try to erase us. We have the Black heterosexual spaces that try to erase us. So what does it mean to actually say, okay, well, we're actually using images of Black queer people as our reference points for understanding the divine. I mean, so this is like really pushing us into visibility, pushing us into the mainstream. I'm thinking about this idea of empowerment through ancestry. Again, I was showing images from 10,000 years ago of Black queer people existing in full embodied sexual lives. And so when we think about the full sweep and a larger sweep of our ancestors and our histories, I do think there is some strength that we can draw from that. So there's this idea about community and belonging. So it's really a question about how do we create a Black queer culture almost from the ground up. So think about this question around celebrations. I mean, so right now we have all kinds of what we say made up holidays. I mean, so we celebrate the Pilgrims killing the Indians. You know, we put on masks and run around in costumes. But what would it mean to say, okay, well, in this particular month, all Black queer people are going to meditate on our inner warrior? How do we build a celebration around that? How do we build a celebration around, okay, here all Black queer people are going to come together to think about how we deal with our social relationships. How do we treat each other in community? All Black queer people come around in this particular full moon or this particular new moon or this particular lunar cycle. We're going to think about Black queer people and our interdisciplinarian. How do we organize? How do we create structures and institutions for our community? So it just basically gives us a new way to create supportive spaces for each other. It gives us a logic to organize queer spaces around so that we can kind of understand our organization is also around elevating ourselves as spiritual beings, figuring out how to elevate ourselves to our full potential. So there's ideas around psychological and emotional healing that are important. So for instance, we saw this figure of the scorpion who kind of symbolizes all of the trauma and the inner woundedness that we're feeling and dealing with, but also kind of thinking about a new way of promoting mental health. Because we can think about, okay, here are a wide range of identities that we have to think about our connection to, thinking about how to discover peace, groundedness, psychic health. I mean, so it just kind of gives us a new, I can spend again a whole hour talking about just that. But again, it gives us a new paradigm of thinking about community health and how we organize to foster it. There's a piece around spiritual fulfillment. How do we understand our connection to the divine? And how does our self-image change when we now see ourselves as a manifestation of divine power? This piece around holistic integration, basically having a map of all of these different energies within ourselves that we can elevate and work on and perfect. And of course, even thinking about a figure like Hopi that is this perfect fusion of masculine and feminine. How do we have models within the community to think about how we pursue a certain kind of holistic integration? Empowerment. So we know that spiritual systems have always been a source of strength for activism. I mean, thinking about, let's say, the Civil Rights Movement and how it drew on the Black Baptist Church, having a new understanding of Black queer divinity and spirituality can give another kind of motor force to Black queer activism, and particularly thinking about how we've survived. We've survived for thousands of years and we're still here. This kind of idea of resilience that comes from understanding our larger spiritual traditions and histories. Okay, so now I'll turn it over to the audience for some feedback from you all. So I think my first question is, how do the themes of queer divinity and spiritual healing resonate with your personal experiences and community work? So if anybody has anything they'd like to share, just kind of in response to what you heard today.
I think that, one of the challenges that we have is that the colonists took away a lot of this from us. In fact, if you go back to Africa, voodoo is still practiced there as a way of life. And I was blessed by having a voodoo circle done for me when I was in Africa. And I think that we've been told that all these other things are bad and evil, and we give this one narrative of Christianity. And I think that it also allows you to be docile and subordinate to your master. And I think that knowing that we had something before, understanding the role of the Moors in the history of the world, allows us as Black people to recognize that we are stronger than. Because if we weren't, why would white people feel so afraid of us? Just our presence alone causes fear. I think that goes into the DNA, which goes generations back, and the memory of the world memory and the world history. So I think this allows people to see that there is another avenue, another gateway to how we are, and understand why we might be different than our clear counterparts in terms of our thinking and our ability to love. And I think it empowers young, gay, queer, how they identify, to say, we are special. We're not these deviants, we are special.
No, absolutely. Thank you.
I would say I truly believe that we're magical as well, and getting back to where you say those powers that we have lost from our clear counterparts. This resonates basically, how do we get, it takes us back to invoking and getting those powers and realizing that we are special and that we're magical in our community. For me, I think that getting back to that, the art that I seen here today ties that back into learning how to get back to that space and keeping that space so that we can recreate that and pass it on to our younger generations.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna offer my comment that is interesting to me. When you say like queer divinity, right? Of thinking of queer in terms of other and non-traditional things like that. Of being told that white Jesus is the savior of things, omniscient, omnipotent, all-knowing, all of these things, right? But even in looking at this, where we just have 16 that you touched on, and there's many more than that, that really drills down on the individual aspect within culture, right? You've got the consciousness, you've got your, all of these different things that are so other to me than just white Jesus, that look like me, that have skin. I know they were blue, and some other things that have skin, that have features that look like me as well too. So it's just amazing the othering now when we build altars to the deities or we give offerings, how Christianity makes it seem like it is queer and that it's other. But we give offerings and we build altars to this white Savior, Jesus Christ, all of these things. So I think it does offer for me in discussion an alternative to Christianity, of knowing that there's a reason why we're not taught this, that I'm not taught that, and that there's discovery in that. And the work that you're doing is that discovery of it. So I think that resonates with me because I've had a similar experience, like I don't really identify with this white savior complex thing that you're trying to give me with Jesus sometimes, but taking away pieces and parts from different things, but knowing that that energy, that power is within me and possessing that, and explaining that when I say that I'm queer to people, right? I possess both of those energies. And I think this is that spiritual healing, I think, for a lot of folks, of understanding where we come from. We've always been here. We've always been here, of those things. So I offer that comment up.
No, thank you for offering it. I mean, it's funny that you said building altars to the white Jesus. 'Cause I actually thought when I was preparing for this presentation, I was like, oh, should I actually like do some ritual work and like lead people through a meditation and do it? And I was like, okay, no, that might be too much to kind of come out of the gate. Too much coming fully out of the gate.
I mean,
Maybe
Christianity is setting the atmosphere, right? It's no different from in Christianity where you say, let's set the atmosphere or things like, yeah, prayer.
That's right.
Everybody bow your head, so I think it's parallels all of that. But I get it too, like black people, you be like, let's light some incense and candles and breath work, and people like, well,
Yeah.
like, breathe what?
But there is something that resonates in the spirit, in the core of our spirit, that many of us don't touch. So it feels alien. But it's almost like for us as black people, you know, when you hear the song "Amazing Grace" being struck up, it just has a chord in your, there's a tonation in your spirit, which I think is why it was, you know, certain things were acculturated to so that our spirits as black people would relate to the music that we were hearing, and then you find yourself involved in that whole religious engagement. But I did love the fact you did stuff with hair, because that is such a controversial thing for people of color, especially for women. You know, you wear your hair differently and so there's certain ways you're supposed to wear your hair in this country. You wear your hair differently. And there's always a controversy when you go somewhere as to how you can wear your hair in a public place, when you're in a business environment, how you can wear your hair that is appropriate. So I love the fact that was incorporated in a very nuanced way without it being like a big to-do. But I said, wow, that's neat that we can see that.
It's divine.
Yeah,
Our hair is divine. Every part of us. Absolutely. Yeah, let me throw another question up here for you all. Okay, so how can the revival, say what, Marlon?
My response might be to this one, let me see.
Okay, so how can the revival of Black queer spiritual traditions inform and enhance advocacy efforts and community mobilization within the context of health disparities and social justice?
Oh, actually, yeah. So, I think your work and other work like it needs to become more integral to HIV prevention and sexual health. But I think at the core of some of the challenges that we face is a disconnection from our own bodies and a disconnection from the divinity of our bodies, which includes a disconnection from the beauty of pleasure and joy and sex and contact and human connection, and the production of shame around our sexuality. And I think that is one of the central challenges, and it's one of the deeply anti-Black and anti-queer things that we face that underpins a lot of the other structural vulnerabilities that we experience. And one reason in my view why HIV prevention advocacy has not been successful, HIV prevention practices and advocacy has not been successful, at least not for us, is because it does not include this. I am not religious. I do not subscribe to any organized religion at all for that main reason. But I am spiritual. Now, after in my many years knowing you and hearing about your work and wanting to know more, I think it would be important for me to delve deeper into this work, to really understand what that spiritual, when I say that I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, what that really means. And I think that's me calling forth, leaning into that aspect that I think all of us would benefit from.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And even as you were talking, I think the thing that I like about this project is that it kind of gives us another language to kind of really dive into what you were saying. So the piece around understanding pleasure. So, meow, this cat deity, is a sign and a symbol of gay pleasure, which you're saying about community. So Ahi with the harp is all about how do we understand our queer community and how we hold together as a group. Everything you're saying about shame, and that's like the scorpion deity. How do we deal with the shame around our bodies and the shame around sexuality? So yeah, so I think these deity figures give just a slightly different approach or slightly different language to really drill into some of the issues that you're pointing out really need to be addressed or continue to be addressed in this particular space. Okay, are there any particular strategies that can be used to incorporate the principles of Black queer spirituality into personal and or communal healing practices? So kind of building on what you're saying and taking the question one step further.
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of having a reading from Dr. Red, and for me, it kind of goes off what Michael was saying about, I don't know if I'll call it stigmatism, but maybe it's just a lack of knowledge of alternative ways to practice spirituality. Like, I meditate, I do yoga, I've been doing that for decades, literally. It's part of because I don't subscribe to a religion either. But in having that reading, it affirmed all that. I didn't have to keep it. So, and most of the people I do yoga and meditate with, they don't look like us. They're not melanated people. And I'm usually the only one in those groups. So removing that stigma or that, and bringing this into those groups, I know it's been helpful for me. It's changed my life in the last 20 plus years. So I definitely think it has a part. How you guys can integrate it, because the smart ones can do that.
Well, I think what we were saying earlier, right, is I went to Black Queer Creative Summit last year with GLAD, and we had meditation. Like, there was built-in time for a self-care wellness, and we had Black, I forget, yogi, right? Yoga,
that's right.
Reiki, and we had those folks to come in, and we had guided meditation. So we had that, and we had a yoga moment and things like that. So those are some ways that we incorporated it, because we talked so much. To me, how particular strategy, and we are reigniting advocacy and community mobilization, but like we had yesterday, right? How do we combat burnout? How do we ignite again that where we have to take breaks? Like I say, the power of no. I had to learn how to say no, right? So I think we can incorporate those strategies. Like you said, the same way people say come set the atmosphere. We had it this morning and nothing wrong with it. Like you said, it resonated. I went into the Black Negro spiritual. May not come when you want them, but it'll be there right on time, right? That we can incorporate that as a part of programming when it does come to the conferences. And this is a part of that, right? It's a breakout. It's a time for us to do it. So I think we can incorporate that as well. I will also say from the plenary with the risky behavior slide, right? We can see, as you just were talking about, right, of orgies. And one of the things on the risk slide was, again, having sex with more than one adult person within the last 24 hours, or having sex with a person living with HIV, looking at folks in the cave, right? First slide, back in the cave, and these examples of pleasure, of thinking of that. And we talk a lot in HIV about centering pleasure and getting away from words like risky behavior or things like that. So this, to me, is also a way of saying that your body, this is your body, of getting in touch with that, and this is normal practice if you choose to do so with consent, consenting adults, those things as well. So I think that could also be incorporated.
And I don't have to replace it either, because we know it's people in our community that are grounded in their faith and Christianity, however we feel about it. So I think this can be supplemental or an alternative, an option for others who may not subscribe to Christianity.
Well, we got to understand as well that that has been whitewashed as well. That if we, I for a while I didn't do the organized religion, but if you want to say he was a black man, we can say
That's right.
that itself has been whitewashed and told to us differently. I think I go back to think of if we were in this state and these were our normal things in our way back then, what was the things that helped us combat disease, you know? So I just wanted to say that's been whitewashed. The image of Christ has been whitewashed as well. These things have been told to us. None of us actually was there, right? So what you have demonstrated and gave us today is actually, for me, what I take away is our truth, our root was before Christianity and what we were told. So I just wanted to throw that out that, you know, it was a black man, if so, right? So that was whitewashed as well. So
I think
I'm sorry. I'm not just saying something.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, hands up, your hands up. Okay.
Sorry. I actually, this is very different from my lived experience, this type of look back. I am still learning a little bit of history every day because I frankly had not really heard much more about Egypt before the Arabs. So Black Egyptians is also a new concept to me. So that's just my own personal learning. But the thing that comes to mind for me right now is that public teaching of spirituality did not become a problem until we stopped talking about Christianity. Throughout America's history, spirituality has been something that was taught in the public square. It just happened to be a Christian focus. But the skills of you are connected to something greater than you is almost foundational to this experiment of democracy, because if we weren't connected to each other in some way that was more than a social interaction, it would just be anarchy. But yet we have lost the ability to have a spiritual dialogue about there's something about you that's resonating in you that causes me to want to be around you. I want to be with you. Sometimes it's just on this level, sometimes it's on that level. But we don't, it's very interesting to me that we have, as a society, become less spiritual and less religious and more fragmented. Because there's nothing that is binding us anymore. So I actually do believe having some level of spirituality is important to our work, if nothing else but to say there is something bigger than you going on here. And will you explore it?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that impetus is also really important for this project. I mean, how, as Black queer people, are we going to make it? I mean, what will be the bond that holds us together? I mean, we always say, like, oh, let's create a new world, let's create a new possibility, let's kind of move into new spaces, let's think beyond, you know, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. And yeah, I think my question has always been how? Like, how does it work, or what does it look like? Or what is at least one concrete way in which it can look? But I think that's really what this project is about. I mean, what will be the foundation that keeps us together? Given everything that's trying to kill us, how will we actually stand up and say enough? How will we learn how to kind of value ourselves and then each other in ways that we can really move forward with power? How can we even tap into the power that we've lost? So those are real questions around building a social fabric and trying to understand the keys that can recreate something that really has been lost. So I appreciate that comment.
And sometimes you just do it. I mean, sometimes you just go out there and do it. And you let the cards fall where they fall. and people who resonate will follow. I've done several spiritual workshops at NAESM and also at the harm reduction and down in Ujima. And they were all well received because I think people are looking for something. We're at a pivotal point right now. We're in an 8 year right now. It's a year of balance. So things that are out of balance are going to come into balance. Things like this are going to be revealed to bring us back into balance. Next year is a 9 year, which is wrapping up and closing down things. And then 2026 is the number 1 year, which is going to be the beginning of things. And as I see it, everything's falling right into place where the energy of the earth and the energy that people I see around me are resonating that there's a hunger for something, there's something missing that people are looking for. And I think this is one of the things that can bring that something back into presence to start manifesting the spiritual being or uncovering the spiritual beings we're meant to be. And I was just thinking that just creating the imagery because I know you have the work that you have at your booth often in the bag that I found from your colleague, just having those images on the bag so people can pick the one that they resonate most with, that they can carry that bag around with them, and having people see that. Nefertiti's all over the place. So these beings could be around just like anybody else. So when someone throws their shoulder bag on, there's an image and it starts a conversation. And I think that's one way of doing it. We're making the cards that people can post on their walls or whatever. What you see, the heart has a tendency to believe. And you create that resonance, that oneness with that deity. And I'm sure that, with 16 deities, one that speaks to each person differently, that they resonate more with that one, that they're aligned more. So I think that's the way you do it, just do it. I would encourage you never to doubt your divine intuition about what to do in a workshop. Because this would have been a very different workshop. I think it would have been more of a authentic workshop if you'd had some of the tools of this divinity present in the workshop. So next time, don't question divine spirit. Don't do that. We do that too often because we try to placate. Because we say, oh, it's a CDC-funded conference, so we can't talk about religion and spirituality, so I have to keep it on the down low and keep it cute. We don't have to. This is our goddamn conference. So let's do what we need to do for ourselves. It's about our healing. We're the ones being most impacted by HIV. And what they're giving us from the CDC and from other entities, obviously is not working. So let's figure out what works for us so we can save ourselves.
Thank you.
Next year, it would be great if you would do a meditation, a spiritual ritual workshop, and if you could maybe offer a couple of times throughout the conference. Pick a time and be on the schedule and allow for people to come perhaps in the morning, whatever time is best, to come and get that experience. I think that's a way to integrate because, like you said, we have to do it and utilize this space, utilize this moment, utilize this organization and this captive audience to be able to further integrate the spiritual practices and the study of culture and history and connecting that to our health, which is in public health, it's separated. Right? And it's separated by design. And it's that separation that continues this ongoing struggle of not being able to connect with our bodies.
Well, and also not remembering that they've been trying to kill us for a long time.
They've been trying to kill us for a long time.
Or this is not anything new. This is just one of a long line of genocides that we've had to survive and live through and figure out a way beyond. All right, I think we're almost wrapped up. Any other final pieces or final questions or final comments people would like to offer?
No, it's just actually your next thing is how more spiritual space is to create healing spaces. I've been to conferences where they had healing spaces and people would go in and visit the healing spaces to get to pull away from, because it can be a lot to pull away from the conference and just be. So that's a great idea to incorporate those healing spaces.
I think a great idea would be to teach chakra healing.
Yeah, I remember it was last year, the workshop that you did that we came to.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that what the one I went to was Creative Change, but that's very white-based. And I would love to see something at a conference that's for Black people, that's put together for us, by us, that's African-based.
Well, yeah, and because that's the whole question, because even, I love that suggestion of like chakra healing, but there are kind of African versions too of like energy systems in the body and alternate ways of understanding energy pathways that also had not been talked about or have also been suppressed that we also need to bring back too. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We definitely need to have those spaces and those moments to have those conversations.
I'm dealing with traumas.
Yeah, so anyway, so here's our information. Please stay connected to us, reach out. Yeah, we've got a QR code. Feel free to hit us up via email or the website. We'd love to collaborate if people are interested in doing these kinds of programs or figuring out how to create these kinds of spaces. Definitely open to keeping this conversation going or coming to bringing this up to St. Louis.
Definitely.
So yeah, so we'll kind of keep these conversations moving and looking forward to having more conversation throughout the conference. So yes, thank you all for coming. Definitely appreciate your presence being here today. And yeah, look forward to more conversations soon.
Yes, thank you.